Hello, everyone, and welcome to the IEP Toolkit. Today, we will be talking about distance learning and contingency plans in IEPs and some of the other challenges that students have right now as schools decide that they are going to have to continue online learning for this fall semester. One major issue that we face is as parents who have students who learn differently is that the IEPs were written with it in mind that the services would be provided in school. Services, accommodations, modifications, supports. It would all be provided in school. So now, how do we adapt that to give the child the same equal access to education that they get in a brick and mortar school now that it's at home? So that might require modifications to the curriculum. It might require different accommodations to help the service be delivered, or access to the education. We might need more PT, or less, and more OT and more speech and language, but less writing. I mean, I'm just making all that up as to skills that people need, but it's really it's kind of a mess. So today I wanted to just start by talking about that the Michigan Department of Education has issued guidance for compliance with the IDEA and the MARS, or Michigan Administrative Rules for Special Ed, during the COVID-19 pandemic. And this was published originally in April and revised in May, and it is posted on our Facebook page if you would like your own copy. I will repost it so that it will show up in this part of the feed. We did post it back in May when it first came out. So I really wanted to talk about this a little bit today, and highlight some of the rules and the guidance for compliance. But and then really just talk about IEPs, and specifically in the age of distance learning. And we'll talk about this more tomorrow as well, because it's a big topic, and it's one that is really important. And as I've said before, we have an issue with all the students' IEPs that most parents don't even know they have, and that's that we don't have baseline data. We don't know how our children progressed from March of 2020 to today. And remember, to start the conversation appropriately about what should be in an IEP, you have to know where the child is now. If we don't know where the child is now, we need to have evaluations, we need to have data, we need to make informed decisions about what the IEP needs to include, um, and go forward in a very knowing way. The other issue that we have is that, um, this sort of adaptability of IEPs to be distance learning. Most of them just don't adapt with the snap of a finger, and it certainly isn't a last minute decision that can be made. So, parents, we've talked about before the need to get a blank IEP form as you're preparing for the meeting, and go through every single section. And in order for you to be the best advocate for your child, which is something that is imperative right now, um, you need to know, or at least think about, if services or accommodations or access to education, access to the curriculum was given in a certain way before, do you think it can be delivered in the same manner if you are required to have online and only online school? And if the answer is no, then you, as parents, our children's first teacher, you need to be thinking about, well, what adaptations can we do to accomplish this goal at home? Maybe you just have to measure the progress differently, or maybe you need to reconsider the whole thing. So some of them will be big changes, some of them will be little changes, but this is here. This is real. This is happening. So we need to make sure that if education is being provided by online services or virtually for general education students or students without disabilities, that as the law guarantees, it is provided to our students with disabilities. And anything that is offered to gen ed students must be offered to special ed students, and that is the law, and it's black and white, and it's a bright line. The other issue that we're running into is because we don't have measurable goals from last year, in most cases, some districts or some IEP teams have brought the old IEP to the meeting and said, we'll just use these. That is a blatant violation of the IDEA. It denies the child FAPE, free appropriate public education, and it is supposed to be based on where the child is right now. And we have measurable goals to determine the progress, to determine if they get to the long-term goal. And we rewrite and we amend and we correct and we supplement and we do all of that to make sure that children are getting what the law entitles them to. So, off the soapbox for a minute, let's look at what the Michigan Department of Education has brought us. First of all, the document has a disclaimer, and I just find it kind of funny that, like, right here on the first page, this document, you see that I underline, is not intended to provide legal advice. I think that's funny that they have to put that in the second paragraph. However, it encourages districts to consider whether an activity can occur via telephone or virtually, and many requirements can continue in that manner. The special education timelines and requirements are set forth in statute or in the law, which has been written and enacted by Congress. Remember, any facility, program, school, whether it's preschool, elementary school, middle school, parochial school, high school, vocational school, it doesn't matter. If they receive federal funding, they must adhere to the IDEA. So the purpose of these rules and this compliance manual is to get everyone speaking the same language. And they wanted to talk about it in terms of a continuity of learning plan. And it's a plan where the district will detail the way they're going to provide and support educational instruction to all ALL enrolled students. And it should include strategies to target children who may be English language learners, to target children who are maybe socially, economically disadvantaged, and then for students who are eligible under Section 504 or the IDEA for services due to a disability. Every student should have a contingency learning plan. I can tell you that I've been to several IEP meetings over the summer, and school districts do not want to put a contingency learning plan in the IEP. It was kind of a we'll deal with it when we get there if we have to situation. It would have been really, really helpful if during the summer these things were thought about, but in most cases they weren't. So we have to be very creative parents now, and we have to bring them to the district's or the special ed director or the IEP team's attention. Remember, how you bring things to their attention is in writing. If it's not in writing, it didn't happen. You have nothing to enforce if it's not in writing. The contingency learning plan should be developed in accordance with a student's IEP, and it should include the entire 2020-2021 school year. Obviously, with conditions that if they go back to brick and mortar, then we have this other plan. So these meetings might take longer than an hour. So, a lot of times I feel like, people feel pressured by time when they're in an IEP meeting. A lot of things are typed into the IEP before we get there. And really, that's not the way it's supposed to be. There is a sample virtual IEP meeting agenda that has been circulated by the U.S. Department of Education that deals with a 60-minute sample protocol. However, I don't think it's realistic for the first virtual IEP only because we don't have a great measure of where these children are now and where we're starting. So, essentially, this is a great idea, and I'm happy to share it with you if you would like a copy. But it certainly is not as relevant for right now and the problems that we're facing right now. So some of the questions that have been asked is what special education and related services must be provided when a district is closed due to COVID-19 pandemic and is not yet providing any services to the general student population. Again, if they're not providing them to general population, gen ed students, they don't have to provide them to special ed students. If the school buildings are closed, but there is a continuity of learning plan that is being given to gen ed students, then of course that would also have to be offered to special ed students. And that each child with an IEP should have equal access to that education to the maximum extent appropriate. Those are pretty loaded words, maximum extent appropriate. And I don't think that was by accident. This is not a Band-Aid. This is, our child's education. So the child IEP team is encouraged in this document to develop an individualized contingency learning plan. And the goals of that plan is for each child to advance appropriately towards attaining their annual IEP goals, to be involved in and make progress in the general education curriculum, a district's continuity of learning plan, or appropriate activities for children, participate in extracurricular and other non-academic activities, and be educated and participate with non-disabled peers to the maximum extent appropriate in all these activities, or in this instance, participate in the continuity of learning plan along with their non-disabled peers. The team is urged and encouraged in these rules to consider the definition of specially designed instruction in the context of the continuity of learning plan. And specially designed instruction has been defined by, and I'm just going to read it to you, adapting as appropriate to the needs of each exceptional child, the content, methodology, or delivery of instruction for the following purposes. 1, to address the unique needs of the child that result from the child's exceptionality. And 2, to ensure access to the child with a disability to the general curriculum, in this instance, a district's continuity of learning plan, so the child can meet the educational standards. So each child has to be looked at individually in the scheme of the continuity of learning plan being offered to gen ed, and an IEP or a contingency learning plan should be set up for those individual children for each individual child with a disability who has an IEP or a 504 or some other adaptation to the curriculum. This is not a one-size-all proposition. This is each child individually has to be assessed for his or her needs, not just how they learn, but how they need to be taught. And with distance learning, this can be a little more complex because, if a child's receiving packets and they have to complete the packet and return it, um, it has to be a packet that is individualized to the skills or lack of skills that that particular child has. And so, parents, if you get a packet that requires writing and your child can't hold a pencil, you need to be in writing objecting to that immediately, because they should have an alternative method to complete those assignments that is consistent with their exceptionality. And I love that that the Michigan Department of Education is using that word, because they really are exceptional kids. Um, so um, there are many other there's confidentiality concerns that are addressed in here. There are how the district should proceed if normal operations are resumed next year, which obviously they're not going to be in many circumstances. And, it talks about the role of intermediate school districts, district operated center based programs. So it's just really a ton of information. It talks about if services can be provided to a child through video conferencing. There's only one student and one staff member present, and the short answer is yes. One-to-one video conferencing is very effective, and it is absolutely allowed. There is a 30 school day timeline for the initial special ed evaluation due to the school building closure because of COVID-19. And that's something that most people don't know about. So we should be screaming and yelling and asking for IEP meetings now before school starts, so that those evaluations can be completed before school starts. There's issues with child find. And so parents, if you do have a concern about your child, if you believe they might have a disability, that they might have a weakness or something just is off, speak up, because there is absolute that the provisions of child find and child identification for eligibility for special ed services are absolutely in force and in place. These rules, go on and on and on about contingency learning plans and written notice and parent consent, and how the one that is really I think is interesting, and how they're going to accomplish is, must reevaluations be completed within 30 school days? Yes. The MARS rules 340.1721B states within 10 days of receipt of a written request for any evaluation, the public agency shall provide the parent and written notice consistent with blah, 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 shall request written parental consent to evaluate, and the time from receipt of parental consent for an evaluation to the notice of an offer of FAPE or the determination of ineligibility shall not be more than 30 school days. The timeline begins upon receipt of the signed parental consent by the public agency requesting the consent. So if you think your child needs to be reevaluated, they're just calling them the public agency, but it's the district, must give you a consent form. And from the minute you sign that consent form, there's 30 school days on which that evaluation or reevaluation must be completed. The dealing with progress right now is really difficult, as we already talked about, but you need to make sure that progress is monitored during distance learning, and it needs to be in the IEP, how that's going to happen, what the frequency of that is going to be. Of course, there's a dispute resolution that's very similar to what it would be if you disagreed with an IEP and were in a brick and mortar school. So all your rights under the IDEA are still intact, and we can discuss those later. So now I want to switch gears a little bit, and I want to talk about, kind of IEPs in the age of distance learning. And, this is a challenge. This is a time for everyone to be patient. This is a time for us all to be good listeners and good researchers and be very, very prepared. My three rules of thumb for being the best advocate for your child you can be are to prepare, plan, and advocate. And that is really, what you need to do. And you need to understand your child's disability, not just the label or the eligibility uh, category. And you need to be able to explain to the team how that affects their ability to learn, um, and how it changes how they need to be taught. Another thing that you need to be prepared to talk about in this distance learning type IEP is what is the environment that your child is going to be studying in or doing school in at home. I did write an article about creating an educational environment at home, to help parents kind of figure that out and not wing it and not have all your kids on separate Zooms at the kitchen table at one time, because certainly for a child that's easily distractible or has attention issues or has focus issues, um, that is going to be a recipe for non-compliance and acting out and who knows what else. So um, that's really, really important to think in advance and create that educational environment. Um, there should be um, COVID-19 individual learning plans and IEP amendments that reflect um, the different services that need to be provided, the differences in the delivery of education during distance learning, and to the extent that that services are going to deviate from the original IEP, it should be in writing and it should be explained and it should reflect exactly what the child's going to receive. It can be amended without a meeting. It cannot be modified without a meeting. So you can add to it without a meeting, but you cannot, take out this goal and put in a different one. You do have to have the PLAF and you have to create the goals from the PLAF, and everything should be measurable. School officials cannot amend the IEP without parental consent. That's really, really important. And they certainly cannot make modifications without parental consent. And if they're going to do any evaluating, they also need to notify parents and get their consent for evaluation as well. So that's just some of the issues with IEPs that we're seeing. There's a lot of strategies that parents can use to improve distance learning and to improve the IEPs and these sort of contingency plans for distance learning. And that is what we will talk about tomorrow. So for now, I hope that you have a wonderful day. Be the best you that you can so that you can be the best advocate for your child. And I will see you all tomorrow when we talk about a different approach for different learners. Email me your questions. If you need your IEP reviewed, let me know. Happy to do it, and happy to make this easier for you in whatever way I can. Have a great day.